The sun hung low and merciless over Willow Creek, painting the dusty main street in shades of burnt orange and dried blood. Clara Hayworth stood at the window of her small ranch house, watching the horizon where the road disappeared into nothing. 5 years she'd been standing at this same window. 5 years since Jake Thornton had ridden away with promises on his lips and her heart in his saddlebags. The townspeople had stopped whispering about it after the 2nd year. By the 3rd, they'd stopped looking at her with pity. Now, in the 5th year, she was simply the woman who ran the Hayworth Ranch alone, who drove her own cattle to market, who fixed her own fences and birthed her own calves, the woman Jake Thornton left behind. Clara's hands were no longer the soft hands of the banker's daughter she'd once been. They were brown from sun, scarred from barbed wire, strong from wielding hammers and hauling water. She pressed her palm against the cool glass of the window, remembering how those same hands had once trembled when Jake held them, how they'd clutched at his coat when he kissed her goodbye that October morning. 5 years, she murmured to the empty house. The word tasted like dust. Behind her, the kitchen still held the ghost of 2 coffee cups on the table, though she only ever used one now. The 2nd chair hadn't been moved since he left. Sometimes she thought about burning it for firewood, but something always stopped her. Pride, maybe, or stupidity. She couldn't tell the difference anymore. The ranch sprawled around her little house like a kingdom she'd never asked to rule. 40 acres of stubborn land that fought her every day. Soil that turned to concrete in summer. Creeks that flooded in spring. Grass that barely fed her small herd of cattle. Her father had left it to her before he died, back when Jake was still here, back when she thought she'd never have to work it alone. She turned from the window and moved through her evening routine with the mechanical precision of someone who'd given up on surprises. Check the horses, count the cattle, secure the chicken coop against coyotes. Every task was a small war against the land, against the loneliness, against the part of her that still waited. As she walked to the barn, her split skirt caught on a loose nail in the fence. The tear it made was just another scar on fabric already mended too many times. She'd stopped caring about pretty clothes the winter after Jake left, when she'd had to sell her good dresses to buy feed for the animals. "Evening, Buttercup," she said to her old mare, running a hand along the horse's neck. Buttercup nickered softly, the only conversation Clara could count on these days. The horse had been Jake's gift to her, bought with his first real paycheck from the Patterson Ranch. Now Buttercup was graying around the muzzle, moving slower, like everything else Jake had touched. The sun was dying properly now, bleeding out across the sky. Clara finished her chores and returned to the house, her boots echoing on the porch boards. Inside, she lit the oil lamp and set about making supper, beans and cornbread. Same as most nights, cooking for one was an art she'd mastered but never loved. As she ate in silence, she could hear the town coming alive in the distance. Willow Creek wasn't much, a main street with a general store, a saloon, a church, and a scattering of houses, but Friday nights brought the ranch hands in for drinking and cards. She used to go to the socials at the church, but the sympathy in the other women's eyes had driven her away. Now she was just poor Clara, the woman who'd waited too long for a man who wasn't coming back. After supper, she sat on the porch with her father's old rifle across her lap. It was a habit born of necessity. A woman alone attracted the wrong kind of attention. The Wheeler boys had learned that lesson the hard way when they'd come sniffing around drunk one night in her 2nd year alone. She'd put buckshot over their heads and hadn't seen them since. The stars came out one by one. Same constellations Jake had taught her to read. The Big Dipper, the North Star, Orion's Belt. He'd said a man could navigate by the stars, find his way home no matter how lost he got. She wondered if he ever looked up at these same stars, wherever he was. California, maybe chasing gold like every other fool, or Texas, working cattle on some spread bigger than their whole town, or dead in some nameless grave, which would at least explain the silence. "You're a fool, Clara Hayworth," she told herself, but her eyes stayed on the road. The night sounds settled around her. Crickets, a distant coyote, the whisper of wind through the cottonwoods by the creek. This was her world now, bounded by fence posts and horizons, measured in seasons survived rather than dreams shared. She'd had offers, of course. Tom Morrison from the bank had asked to court her twice. Ben Davies, who owned the general store, always smiled too long when she came for supplies. Even Pastor Williams had hinted that a woman shouldn't be alone, that God intended partnership. But Clara's heart was a stubborn thing, stuck on a memory that grew fainter every year. Rising from the porch, she made one last check of the property. The cattle were settled, the horses quiet. Her small vegetable garden needed water come morning. The beans were struggling in the heat. Everything needed tending. Everything needed care. And she was just one woman with 2 hands and a heart that refused to let go. Back inside, she prepared for bed with the same careful routine. Bar the door. Check the windows. Place the rifle within reach. In her small bedroom, she caught sight of herself in the mirror her mother had left her. The girl Jake had courted was gone. In her place stood a woman carved by wind and work, her blonde hair gone dull, her blue eyes harder than they used to be. She was 27 now, past the age when most women had husbands and babies. The town called her a spinster when they thought she couldn't hear. As she lay in bed, she could hear her heart beating in the silence. 5 years was a long time to wait for anyone. 5 years was enough time for a man to circle the world, to build a fortune, to forget a promise made in the sweet grass of autumn. But still, before she closed her eyes, Clara Hayworth looked through her bedroom window at the road that led into town. Still, she waited, because waiting was all she had left of him, and she wasn't ready to let even that go. Tomorrow would be like today, work and silence and survival. Tomorrow she would be the woman who didn't need anyone, who could shoe her own horses and face down any man who thought her vulnerable. But tonight, in the darkness of her room, she allowed herself to be the girl who'd believed in promises, who'd kissed Jake Thornton goodbye and thought 5 years was nothing compared to forever. Outside, a wolf howled somewhere in the hills, and the sound was loneliness given voice. Clara pulled her quilt higher and closed her eyes, wondering if somewhere under these same stars, Jake Thornton remembered her name, wondering if she'd recognize him if he came back, wondering if she'd even want to. The wind picked up, rattling the windows like something trying to get in, or maybe like something trying to tell her to let go. But Clara Hayworth had built her life on stubbornness, and she'd be damned if she'd stop now, even if it killed her, even if it already had. The dust rose in a cloud from the main street as Clara drove her wagon toward Morrison's general store. It was the second Saturday of the month. Time to stock up on supplies, and the town was busier than usual. Ranch hands lounged against storefronts, wives clustered in gossiping groups, and children darted between horses and wagons like sparrows. Clara kept her eyes straight ahead, ignoring the familiar weight of stairs. She'd learned to wear indifference like armor, to let the whispers slide off her back like rain. But today something was different. The quality of the stairs had changed, charged with electricity she couldn't name. "Morning, Miss Clara." Ben Davies called from his store's entrance, but his smile was nervous, his eyes sliding past her to something down the street. She nodded briefly, pulling Buttercup to a stop outside Morrison's. As she climbed down from the wagon, she heard it, the sound that made her blood turn to ice water in her veins. Spurs. Not the common jingle of working spurs, but a particular rhythm she'd memorized 5 years ago. A slightly uneven gait, favoring the left leg just a touch from an old break that hadn't healed quite right. Clara's hands stilled on the wagon's side. She forced herself to breathe normally, to finish tying off the reins with steady fingers. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a wild thing trying to escape. "Clara." The voice came from behind her, deeper than she remembered, roughened by years and distance. She closed her eyes briefly, gathering the pieces of herself that wanted to scatter like quail before a hawk. When she turned, she made sure her face was stone. Jake Thornton stood 10 feet away, hat in his hands. The boy who'd left was gone, replaced by a man carved from harder materials. His face was sun-darkened and lean, marked by a scar that ran from his left temple to his jaw. His black hair was longer, touched with premature gray at the temples. The laughing blue eyes she'd loved were steady now, weighted with things she couldn't read. He wore good clothes, not fancy, but well made. His gun sat low on his hip in a worn holster that had seen use. Everything about him spoke of roads traveled and battles survived, of a life lived hard and fast in places she'd never see. "Jake," she said, proud that her voice didn't shake. The street around them had gone quiet. She could feel the town holding its breath, waiting to see what Clara Hayworth would do with the ghost that had just walked back into her life. "You look," he started, then stopped, seeming to realize that nothing he could say would bridge 5 years of silence. "I look like a woman who's been running a ranch alone," she finished for him, her voice sharp as winter wind. "What are you doing here?" He shifted his weight, and she caught the slight wince. The old injury still pained him. Then, good. She hoped lots of things pained him. "I came back," he said simply. "I know I'm late. I know you probably—" He stopped again, running a hand through his hair in a gesture so familiar it made her chest tight. "I just wanted to see you, to explain." Explain. The word came out harder than she'd intended. Several people on the street stepped back. "You want to explain 5 years. You want to explain why I've been mending fences and birthing calves and fighting off drunk cowboys alone while you've been doing God knows what and God knows where." His jaw tightened. "Clara, if we could talk somewhere private." "No." She turned back to her wagon, pulling out her supply list with hands that only trembled a little. "I've got business to attend to. Mr. Thornton, you'll excuse me." She brushed past him toward the store, but his hand caught her elbow. The touch burned through her sleeve like a brand. "Please," he said quietly, and in that one word she heard an echo of the boy she'd loved. "Just give me a chance to—" She jerked her arm free. "You had your chance. You rode away with it." The bell over Morrison's door jangled as she entered, leaving Jake standing in the street with half the town watching. Tom Morrison looked up from behind the counter, his eyes bright with curiosity. "Miss Clara," he said carefully. "Heard we had a visitor in town. I need 10 pounds of flour, 5 of sugar, and 2 of coffee," she said, placing her list on the counter. "And ammunition for a Winchester." Tom's eyebrows rose slightly at the last item, but he began gathering her supplies without comment. Through the store window, she could see Jake still standing by her wagon, talking to Ben Davies. Other men had gathered around, some shaking his hand, others holding back, waiting to see which way the wind would blow. "He's staying at the boarding house," Tom offered as he wrapped her goods. "Rode in yesterday evening on a good horse. Folks say he's been down in Mexico, fighting in their wars." Clara said nothing, counting out her money with careful precision. "Looks like he's seen some rough times," Tom continued. "That scar?" Mr. Morrison," Clara said evenly. "I'd appreciate it if you'd load my wagon. I have a full day's work ahead." He flushed but nodded, gathering up her purchases. Clara followed him out, steeling herself for another encounter, but Jake had moved off, standing now outside the saloon with a group of men. His eyes found hers across the street, but she looked away, helping Tom load the supplies. As she climbed back onto the wagon seat, she heard footsteps approaching, but it wasn't Jake. It was Mary Patterson, the mayor's wife, her face bright with the pleasure of fresh gossip. "Clara, dear," she said, placing a hand on the wagon's side. "What a shock this must be for you. After all this time, to have him just appear." "Good day, Mrs. Patterson," Clara said, gathering the reins. "Of course, we all understand why he might have stayed away," Mary continued, her voice dripping false sympathy. "After what happened with the Patterson ranch money and all, though I'm sure he's made amends by now." Clara's hand stilled. What money? Mary's eyes widened with delight at having information Clara didn't. Why, the $500 that went missing right before Jake left. My husband always suspected, but of course, nothing was ever proved. Water under the bridge now, I'm sure. The blood drained from Clara's face. $500. A fortune. Enough to make a man run. To make him desperate enough to abandon everything. Excuse me, Clara said numbly, snapping the reins. Buttercup lurched forward, nearly knocking Mary Patterson aside. She drove out of town at a pace that had the wagon bouncing dangerously, her mind spinning. Theft. They thought Jake was a thief, had whispered it behind her back for 5 years while she waited like a fool. And now he was back, well-dressed and armed, with stories of Mexico and wars. The ranch appeared before her like a refuge. She unhitched Buttercup with shaking hands, unloaded her supplies, threw herself into the endless work that kept her sane. But her hands fumbled with familiar tasks, her mind returning again and again to Jake's scarred face, to Mary Patterson's poisonous smile, to 5 years of questions that suddenly had different shapes. The sun was setting when she heard the horse approaching. She knew it was him before she looked up from the vegetable garden. He sat his mount well, a fine bay gelding that must have cost plenty. Everything about him spoke of money now, from his boots to his gun. Blood money, war money, stolen money. "You're trespassing," she said, not looking up from the beans she was watering. He dismounted anyway, ground-tying his horse with the confidence of a man who'd spent years in the saddle. "We need to talk." "No, we don't." She moved down the row, the water bucket heavy in her grip. "Whatever you've come to say, I don't want to hear it. Not even if it's the truth." She laughed, short and bitter. "The truth from a man who promised to write and never sent a single letter, who left me to face this town alone while they whispered about missing money and fallen women." He flinched. "You heard about that?" "Just today. Funny how everyone knew but me." She set the bucket down hard, water sloshing over the sides. "Is that why you ran? Did you take it?" "No." The word came out flat and hard. "But someone wanted people to think I did." "Convenient." He moved closer, and she could smell horse and leather and something else. Gunpowder. Maybe the smell of violence. "Clara, I left because someone threatened to hurt you if I didn't. The money was just their way of making sure I couldn't come back." She finally looked at him fully, taking in the new lines around his eyes, the weathered set of his shoulders. "And I'm supposed to believe that?" "I don't expect you to believe anything," he said quietly. "I know I lost that right, but I'm here now, and I'm not leaving until you know the truth. All of it." "The truth." She stood, brushing dirt from her skirts. "The truth is that I've survived 5 years without you. The truth is that I don't need you anymore. Jake Thornton. So whatever brought you back, guilt, nostalgia, some misguided sense of honor, you can take it and ride out the same way you rode in." His eyes darkened. "You think it was easy? You think I wanted to leave?" "I think you made a choice," she said. "And I've made mine. Get off my land." For a moment, she thought he'd argue. The old Jake would have smiled and charmed and worn her down with persistence. But this Jake just looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. "All right," he said. "But I'm not leaving town. Not yet. You'll see me around. Clara. And sooner or later, you'll listen." He mounted his horse in one smooth motion, touching his hat brim in a mockery of courtesy. Then he was gone, leaving only dust and the echo of hoofbeats and a hole in her chest where her anger had been. Clara stood in her garden until full dark, staring at the road where he'd disappeared. 5 years she'd waited. 5 years she'd hoped. And now that he was here, all she wanted was for him to be gone again, taking his secrets and his scars and his dangerous eyes with him. But she knew, with a certainty that sat like lead in her stomach, that Jake Thornton wasn't going anywhere. Whatever had brought him back, whatever debt or desire drove him, he meant to stay until it was settled. And God help her, She didn't know if she was strong enough to survive him twice. The kitchen table bore the scars of 5 years, knife marks from countless meals prepared alone, water stains from hot cups set down in haste, a burn mark from that winter night when she'd fallen asleep over the account books and knocked over the oil lamp. Clara traced these marks now with one finger, unable to sleep, unable to stop thinking about scarred faces and stolen money and promises that turned to dust. 3 days had passed since Jake's return. 3 days of seeing him everywhere in town, at the general store, outside the saloon, talking with ranchers at the stockyard. He moved through Willow Creek like he belonged there, and people were starting to treat him that way. The initial suspicion was giving way to curiosity, even acceptance. Men who'd whispered about theft 5 years ago now bought him drinks and slapped his back. Clara had avoided town, but she couldn't avoid the memories that his presence had stirred up. They came at her when she least expected it, while milking the cow, while mending harnesses, while trying to sleep in her narrow bed, the way he used to kiss her forehead before saying goodbye, the dreams they'd shared over this very table, the night before he left, when he'd held her so tight she thought he'd never let go. A sound outside made her stiffen. Footsteps on the porch, careful and measured. Her hand found the rifle before the knock came. "Clara, it's Tom Morrison." She frowned, checking the clock. Past 10 at night, too late for social calls. She kept the rifle in hand as she opened the door a crack. Tom stood there with his hat in his hands, his usually cheerful face troubled. "Sorry to disturb you so late, Miss Clara, but I thought you should know. There's been talk at the saloon. Some of the boys are pretty liquored up, and they're saying things." "What kind of things?" He shifted uncomfortably. "About you and Jake, about how maybe it's time someone taught him a lesson for abandoning a good woman. Ed Wheeler's been particularly vocal." Clara's jaw tightened. Ed Wheeler, one of the brothers she'd run off with buckshot. "I can handle Ed Wheeler." "I know you can, but there's 5 or 6 of them, and they're working each other up. Sheriff's out at the Bradley Ranch dealing with rustlers. I just thought, maybe you should know." After Tom left, Clara stood in her kitchen, thinking she could bar the doors, wait it out, hope they'd drink themselves stupid and forget. But she knew Ed Wheeler. He held grudges like treasures, and liquor only made him meaner. She was reaching for her shawl when she heard the horses, multiple riders, coming fast. Through the window, she could see torches bobbing in the darkness. Her blood turned cold. Fire was every rancher's nightmare. Moving quickly, she grabbed the rifle and slipped out the back door. The barn would be their target. Destroy her livestock. Cripple her livelihood. She could hear their drunken voices now, Ed Wheeler's loudest among them. "Come on out. Clara, time. You learned you can't go around playing the righteous woman when everyone knows what you are." She positioned herself behind the water trough, rifle steady. The first rider into the yard would get a warning shot. The second wouldn't get a warning. But before she could fire, another shot rang out. One of the torches went flying as a rider cursed and grabbed his hand. Jake emerged from the shadows near the barn, his pistol gleaming in the moonlight. "Evening, boys," he said calmly. "Little late for social calls, isn't it?" Ed Wheeler wheeled his horse around. "This ain't your business, Thornton, unless you're finally here to claim your woman." "My business is making sure you boys get home safe," Jake said. "Hate for anyone to catch a bullet in the dark. Accidents happen so easy at night." "There's 6 of us and 1 of you," another rider slurred. 7, Clara said, stepping out from behind the trough, rifle aimed at Ed's chest. "And I don't miss at this range." The riders shifted nervously. Drunk as they were, they knew Clara's reputation with a rifle. "This how it is then," Ed spat. "You taking him back after what he done after he left you here to rot while he went off playing soldier." "What I do is none of your concern," Clara said evenly. "But burning my barn is, Sheriff might be at the Bradley place, but he'll be back tomorrow. Wonder how he'll feel about attempted arson." "You got no proof we were gonna." Another shot from Jake's pistol sent Ed's torch spinning into the dirt. "Now you're down to 4 torches," Jake observed. "Want to try for 3? The riders muttered among themselves, bravado fading in the face of 2 steady guns. Finally, Ed jerked his horse's head around. "This ain't over. Thornton, you neither. Clara, this town's got a long memory." They rode off in a cloud of dust and curses, taking their torches with them. Clara stayed frozen, rifle still raised, until the sound of hoofbeats faded completely. Only then did she lower the weapon, her hands beginning to shake. "You can come out now," Jake said quietly. "They're gone." She turned to find him closer than expected, close enough to see the tension in his shoulders, the watchful set of his face. "I didn't ask for your help." "No," he agreed. "You never ask for help, not even when you need it. I had it handled. 6 drunk men with torches." He shook his head. "Clara, you're brave, but you're not bulletproof." "I've managed 5 years without you protecting me," she snapped. "Don't start now." He studied her in the moonlight, and she became aware of how she must look. Hair loose around her shoulders, nightgown covered only by a shawl, bare feet in boots she'd shoved on in haste. Something shifted in his expression, a softness that made her step back. 5 years, he repeated. "You want to know where I was? Clara, what I was doing while you were here fighting off men like Wheeler?" "No." The word came out too quickly. "I don't want to know anything." "I was in Mexico." He continued anyway. "Fighting in their wars because it was the only work I could get where no one knew my name. Sleeping in the dirt, eating when I could, sending every peso I saved back here through intermediaries to pay off debts that weren't mine." She turned away, but he caught her shoulder gently. "The missing money from the Patterson ranch. It was Robert Patterson himself who took it. His gambling debts had come due, and he needed someone to blame. He chose me because I was convenient, young, foolish, in love enough to be predictable." "Stop!" She pulled free of his touch. "Just stop." "He threatened you, Clara. Said if I didn't leave, if I didn't stay gone, he'd make sure everyone believed you were involved too. Said he'd ruin you, see you arrested, destroy your father's ranch and everything you loved." The words hit her like physical blows. She pressed a hand to her stomach, trying to hold in the sick feeling rising there. "So I ran." Jake finished quietly. "Like a coward, I ran. And I've regretted it every day since." "Why come back now?" Her voice sounded strange to her own ears, hollow and distant. "If Robert Patterson is dead. Died 6 months ago in California. His widow found documents, proof of what he'd done. She wrote to me through an old contact, told me I was free to come home." He laughed bitterly. "Home, as if I had any right to call this place home anymore." Clara moved to the porch steps and sank down, suddenly exhausted. Everything she'd believed for 5 years was shifting, reforming into new shapes. The abandonment, the betrayal, the choice to leave, all of it rewritten in a moment. Jake sat down beside her, careful to leave space between them. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said. "I don't expect anything. I just needed you to know the truth." "The truth," she repeated, tasting the word. "The truth is, I hated you. Every day for 5 years, I hated you for leaving, for making me into this person, hard and bitter and alone." He flinched but didn't speak. "I built walls," she continued, staring out at her land bathed in moonlight. "Against the town, against the pity, against anyone who tried to get close. I turned myself into stone because stone doesn't feel pain." "You're not stone," he said softly. "You're the strongest person I know, but you're not stone." She laughed, short and sharp. "You don't know me anymore. Jake, the girl you left behind is gone." "I know." He stood, settling his hat back on his head. "But I'd like to know the woman she became, if you'll let me." Clara looked up at him, this stranger wearing Jake Thornton's face. "I don't know if I can." "I'm not asking for your trust," he said. I'm not asking for anything except a chance to prove that I'm not the boy who ran away, that maybe I can be the man who stays." He touched his hat brim and walked to his horse, hidden in the shadows by the barn. As he mounted, he looked back at her. "I'll be around, Clara, whenever you need me, whether you ask or not." That's a promise from someone who knows the weight of broken promises. Then he was gone, leaving Clara alone on her porch steps with the wreckage of 5 years of certainty scattered around her like broken glass. She sat there until dawn, watching the stars fade and the sky lighten, wondering if truth was better or worse than the lies she'd been living with. In the growing light, her ranch looked the same as always, weathered and worn but standing. Like her, she supposed, scarred but surviving. The question now was whether surviving was enough anymore, or if Jake's return had awakened something in her that demanded more. She rose stiffly, bones protesting the night spent on hard wood, and went inside to start another day. But something had changed in the night, some small crack in the walls she'd built, and through that crack, against her will and better judgment, a tiny flame of something that might have been hope began to flicker. The morning after Ed Wheeler's attempted raid, Clara found her fence posts cut along the eastern boundary. 3 days later, someone had diverted the creek that fed her cattle's water trough. By the end of the week, she discovered 2 of her best-laying hens dead, their necks wrung. She told no one, especially not Jake. Each act of sabotage she met with grim determination, repairing what was broken, replacing what was lost. But she knew this was only the beginning. Ed Wheeler wasn't known for letting grudges die easy. The Sunday service at the church was sparsely attended. Most of the ranchers were out dealing with the outbreak of hoof rot that had everyone nervous. Clara sat in her usual pew near the back, ignoring the whispers that followed her like shadows. She'd grown used to them over the years, but lately they'd taken on a different tone. Speculation about her and Jake, about what his return meant, about whether she'd take him back. Love is patient. Love is kind. Pastor Williams read from Corinthians, his voice carrying through the small church. It does not envy. It does not boast. Clara's attention wandered to the window, where she could see her wagon and Buttercup waiting patiently. She needed to get back, check on the cattle, make sure no more fences had been cut in her absence. And love never fails. A bitter taste filled her mouth. Love had failed her plenty. Failed her when Jake rode away. Failed her every day she waited for word that never came. Failed her now when she couldn't decide if the truth made things better or worse. After the service, she tried to slip out quickly, but Mary Patterson intercepted her on the church steps. "Clara, dear, you look tired," Mary said with false concern. "All this trouble must be wearing on you. First Jake's return, and now these incidents at your ranch." Clara stiffened. She hadn't told anyone about the sabotage. "I don't know what you mean." "Oh, everyone knows Ed Wheeler's been making threats, and someone saw him riding near your property late at night." Mary leaned in closer. "A woman alone, trying to run a ranch. Perhaps it's time to consider selling. My husband knows several buyers who would give you a fair price." "My ranch isn't for sale." "Of course not," Mary said smoothly. "But if things get difficult, the offer stands." Clara pushed past her, anger burning hot in her chest. Sell her ranch. Give up everything she'd worked for, bled for, survived for. Not while she still drew breath. As she climbed onto the wagon, she spotted Jake across the street, talking with Sheriff Coleman, who must have returned from the Bradley Ranch. Their conversation looked serious, Jake gesturing toward her ranch's direction. She snapped the reins before either man could approach. Back home, she threw herself into work with fierce energy. The fence posts needed reinforcing, the chicken coop required repairs. The irrigation ditches had to be cleared before the spring melt. She worked until her hands cramped and her back screamed, trying to outrun the feeling that walls were closing in around her. Near sunset, she heard riders approaching, multiple horses moving slow. Her hand found the rifle. But then she recognized Sheriff Coleman's gray Mustang in the lead. Jake rode beside him, and behind them came Tom Morrison and, surprisingly, Ben Davies from the general store. "Miss Clara." The sheriff tipped his hat. "Mind if we have a word?" She stood on her porch, rifle loose in her hands but ready. "About what?" "About Ed Wheeler and the harassment you've been experiencing." "I haven't made any complaints." "No," Coleman agreed, dismounting. "But Jake here's been keeping an eye on things, and what he's seen has me concerned. Cut fences, diverted water, dead chickens. That's destruction of property. Miss Clara, that's a crime." She shot Jake a hard look. "I said I could handle it." "With all respect," the sheriff continued, "Ed Wheeler's been building up to something like this for years, ever since you ran him off with that shotgun. He's been nursing a grudge. Now he's got friends backing him, and they're getting bolder." "What do you want me to do?" Clara asked. "File a complaint you know as well as I do that'll just make things worse." "Actually," Tom Morrison spoke up, "we have a proposition." Clara's eyes narrowed. "What kind of proposition?" Ben Davies cleared his throat. "Some of us in town, the decent folks, we've been talking. What's happening to you isn't right. You've worked this land fair and honest for 5 years, and you deserve to do it in peace. We want to help." Tom added, "Take turns riding patrol around your property. Make it clear that you're not alone, that the town stands behind you." "Why?" The question came out sharper than intended. "Why now? Where was this help 3 years ago? Or 4? The men shifted uncomfortably. Finally, Jake spoke. "Because I asked them to." "You," Clara's voice choked off, "you had no right." "Maybe not," Jake agreed calmly. "But I did it anyway. Because whether you want to admit it or not, Wheeler's escalating. This isn't going to stop with dead chickens. I don't need—" A shot rang out, cutting through her words. Her kitchen window exploded in a shower of glass. Everyone dove for cover as more shots followed, coming from the tree line beyond the barn. "Stay down!" Coleman shouted. Drawing his weapon, Clara pressed herself against the porch boards, glass crunching under her as she crawled toward better cover. Jake was suddenly beside her, his body shielding hers as another bullet whined overhead. "Can you see them?" the sheriff called. Tom Morrison, crouched behind the water trough, pointed toward the trees. Muzzle flash, about 50 yards out, 2, maybe 3 shooters. Jake's pistol was in his hand, steady despite the chaos. "Wheeler's getting desperate." "Or drunk," Clara muttered, then raised her voice. "My rifle's just inside the door." "I'll get it." Before she could protest, Jake rolled through the doorway, staying low. Seconds later, he was back, pressing her Winchester into her hands. Sheriff Coleman fired toward the trees, his shot answered by another volley. "Ed Wheeler," he shouted. "This is Sheriff Coleman. Cease fire immediately." Laughter drifted from the tree line. "Just having a little target practice. Sheriff ain't no law against that." "There is when you're shooting at people and property." Coleman returned. "Come out with your hands visible, or things are going to get a lot worse for you." Another shot answered him, this one striking the porch post inches from Clara's head. Jake cursed and returned fire, his shots precise and controlled. "Tom, Ben," the sheriff commanded. "Circle around to the left, see if you can flank them. Jake, keep them busy." As the 2 merchants moved off, Jake continued laying down covering fire. Clara found herself watching him with reluctant admiration. Whatever he'd been doing in Mexico, he'd learned to handle himself in a fight. Gone was the impetuous boy who'd rather charm his way out of trouble than face it head on. "On 3, we rush the barn," Jake said quietly. "Better cover there." "I'm not running from my own home." "It's not running, it's tactics." He glanced at her, a ghost of his old grin flickering across his face. "Trust me." The word hung between them, heavy with history. "Clara," Sheriff Coleman called. "Get to better cover." Before she could decide, Jake grabbed her hand. 3, 2, 1. They ran together, bullets kicking up dust at their heels. The barn door loomed ahead, and then they were through. Jake slamming it shut behind them. In the sudden dimness, Clara could hear her horses whinnying nervously. "You all right?" Jake's hands ran over her arms, checking for injuries. "I'm fine." She pulled away, moving to a crack in the wall where she could see out. "This is what you brought down on me. This is what happens when you come back stirring up old troubles." "This was coming anyway," Jake said flatly. "Wheeler's kind doesn't need much excuse." Outside, they could hear Tom and Ben moving through the brush. More shots were exchanged. Then suddenly, Ed Wheeler's voice, high and panicked. All right, we're coming out." Through the crack, Clara watched 3 men emerge from the trees, hands raised. Ed Wheeler and 2 others she recognized as drifters who hung around the saloon. Sheriff Coleman moved in quickly, relieving them of their weapons. "It's over," Jake said quietly. Clara leaned her forehead against the rough barn wall, adrenaline leaving her shaky. "It's not over. Wheeler has friends, cousins. This was just the beginning. Then we'll face whatever comes next." Jake moved to stand beside her. "I know you don't want my help. Clara, I know you've done fine without me, but I'm not leaving you to face this alone." "Why?" She turned to look at him in the dim light. "Why does it matter to you what happens to me?" His scarred face was serious, shadows playing across the marks that violence had left on him. "Because I never stopped loving you. Not in Mexico. Not through all the fights and the running and the nights I thought I'd die in some worthless battle. You were the only clean thing I carried with me." The words hit her like a physical blow. She turned away, unable to bear the honesty in his eyes. Don't say things like that." "I'll stop saying it when it stops being true." Outside, Sheriff Coleman was reading charges to Wheeler and his companions. Through the barn door, Clara could see Tom and Ben standing guard, rifles ready. The immediate danger had passed, but she knew Jake was right. This was far from over. "I need to think," she said finally. "I need time." Jake nodded. "I've waited 5 years. I can wait longer." They emerged from the barn to find Coleman loading the shooters onto horses. Wheeler shot Clara a look of pure venom as they passed. "This ain't done," he snarled. "Yes, it is," Coleman said firmly. "You're looking at attempted murder charges. Ed, you'll be lucky if you see daylight in the next 5 years. As they rode away, Tom Morrison approached Clara. "That offer stands. Miss Clara, we'll organize patrols. Make sure no one else gets ideas." She wanted to refuse, to insist she could handle things alone as she always had. But looking at her shattered window, at the bullet holes in her porch, she knew pride might get her killed. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I appreciate it." As the men prepared to leave, Jake lingered. "I'll take first watch tonight," he said. "No arguments." For once, Clara didn't argue. She was tired, down to her bones, tired of fighting, tired of being strong, tired of pretending she didn't need anyone. "There's coffee on the stove," she said, not looking at him. "Help yourself." It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't trust. But it was something. A crack in the wall. Maybe a beginning. As she swept up the broken glass from her kitchen floor, she could see Jake settling in by the barn, rifle across his knees, watching the darkness for threats. And despite everything, despite 5 years of anger and hurt and betrayal, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Safe. The morning mist clung to the valley like a secret as Clara watched Jake working on her fence line. He'd arrived at dawn, tools in hand, without asking permission. For 3 days now, since the shooting, he'd shown up like this, fixing what needed fixing, tending what needed tending, always leaving before she could either thank him or tell him to go. She should have been angry at his presumption. Instead, She found herself making extra coffee, leaving biscuits wrapped in cloth where he'd find them. They developed a strange dance of silence and distance, communicating through actions rather than words. "That's the last of the posts," Tom Morrison said, wiping sweat from his brow. He'd come to help, along with Ben Davies and 2 other men from town. The patrols had been working. No more cut fences, no more dead chickens. But Clara knew it was the calm before a storm. "I appreciate the help," she said, offering Tom water from the bucket. "It's what neighbors do," he replied, but his eyes followed Jake's movements. "He's a good worker, different than before." "Before, he was full of dreams and talk," Clara said quietly. "Now he just works." Tom nodded slowly. "War changes a man. Mexico was hard fighting, from what I hear, not regular army stuff. Guerrilla warfare, mountain fighting, survival work." Clara said nothing, but she'd noticed the changes too. The way Jake always positioned himself to see all approaches, how he slept, when he slept at all, with his boots on and gun within reach, the economical way he moved, saving energy for when it might be needed. "Clara," Ben Davies's voice carried urgency as he rode up fast. "Trouble coming. Wheeler's cousin, Frank, just rode into town with about 8 men. They're liquoring up at the saloon, talking about justice for Ed." Jake materialized beside them, having heard the warning. "How long?" "Hour, maybe 2, Ben said. "Sheriff's trying to round up deputies, but most folk are scared." "We should get you somewhere safe." Tom said to Clara. "This is my land," she said firmly. "I'm not leaving." "Clara," Jake started. "No," she cut him off. "I've worked too hard to run now, but I won't ask anyone else to risk their necks for my stubborn pride. You all should go." Tom and Ben exchanged glances. Then Tom spoke. "With respect, Miss Clara, we already voted on this. We're staying." "I'll ride back. Gather more men," Ben said, wheeling his horse around. "Anyone with spine enough to stand up to bullies." As he galloped off, Clara felt something tight in her chest loosen slightly. For 5 years she'd stood alone, believing that was strength. Maybe there was another kind of strength in letting others stand beside you. They worked quickly to prepare. Windows were boarded, water barrels filled in case of fire, ammunition distributed. Jake took charge naturally, positioning men where they'd have the best lines of sight, setting up fallback positions. "You've done this before," Clara observed, finding him on the barn roof where he was keeping watch. "Too many times," he replied without looking at her. "Always defending someone else's land, someone else's cause. This is the first time it's meant something." She climbed up beside him, her skirts hampering the effort. The view stretched for miles. Her land, hard-won and blood-bought. "Tell me about Mexico." He was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. "Then, it was supposed to be simple. Ride south, find work, send money back to clear my name. But nothing's simple in a civil war. You pick a side because you have to. Then you fight because that's what you do. Then you keep fighting because you don't remember how to stop." "But you did stop." "When word came about Robert Patterson, took me 3 months to extract myself, make it to the border, another month to work up the courage to come back." He finally looked at her. "I almost didn't. Figured you'd have married, moved on. Part of me hoped you had." "Why?" "Because you deserved better than waiting for a ghost." His hand moved unconsciously to his scarred face. "I'm not the man who left. Clara, I've done things, seen things. There's blood on my hands that won't wash clean." Clara studied his profile against the afternoon sky. "We've all got blood on our hands, one way or another. I've killed 2 men defending this place." His head snapped toward her. "What?" "Year after you left, rustlers tried to take my cattle. I put buckshot in one's chest. Year after that, a drifter thought a woman alone would be easy prey." Her voice was matter-of-fact. "He was wrong." Jake's expression shifted through several emotions before settling on something like respect. "You've become formidable. Clara Hayworth. I've become what I needed to be. Dust on the horizon cut their conversation short. Riders, moving fast. Jake counted quickly. 12, maybe 15, more than expected. They climbed down quickly. Jake calling out positions. Clara took her place at an upstairs window with her Winchester, watching the riders approach. Frank Wheeler rode in front, a bigger, meaner version of his cousin. The men with him were hired guns, not drunk townsmen. Clara Hayworth, Frank's voice boomed across the yard. You've got my cousin locked up on false charges. Time to pay for that. Your cousin shot up my home, Clara called back. He's where he belongs. Ed was just trying to scare you into acting right, taking up with the man who abandoned you, acting like you're better than decent folk. Someone needs to teach you your place. Jake stepped out from the barn, purposefully drawing attention. Frank Wheeler, heard about you down in Sonora, still hiring out to whoever pays. I see. Frank's eyes narrowed. Thornton, heard you were back. Also heard you turned yellow down south, running from fights. I'm not running now. The tension stretched taut as wire. Clara could see her defenders, 7 men total, positioned around the property, outnumbered 2 to 1, but with better cover. Last chance. Frank called. Send Thornton out, sign your ranch over to cover Ed's bail and damages, and we ride away peaceful. Clara's answer was a shot that took Frank's hat off. Get off my land! The yard erupted. Gunfire cracked from all directions as both sides opened up. Clara worked her rifle methodically, picking targets, making shots count. Below, she could hear Jake's pistol, steady as a heartbeat. A rider broke through, torch in hand, heading for the barn. Clara swung her rifle, but Tom Morrison was faster, dropping the man before he could throw the flame. Another tried for the house and met Jake coming around the corner. They faced each other for a split second before Jake's gun spoke first. The battle raged for what felt like hours, but was probably minutes. Then, suddenly, blessed quiet. Clara's ears rang in the silence. Through the gun smoke, she could see several bodies on the ground, others riding hard for the horizon. Everyone all right? Jake's voice, calm and controlled. Responses came back, minor wounds, nothing serious. They'd held, they'd won. Clara made her way downstairs on shaking legs. The yard looked like a battlefield, which she supposed it was. Jake stood in the middle of it, reloading his pistol with mechanical precision. You saved my barn, she said. You saved my life, he replied, nodding to where a dead gunman lay behind him. I didn't see him. Your shot did. They stood there, surrounded by the aftermath of violence, and Clara felt something fundamental shift between them. They'd fought together, bled together, protected each other. The boy who'd left her was truly gone, but the man who'd returned. Thank you, she said simply. Always, he replied, and she knew he meant it. Sheriff Coleman arrived with reinforcements just as they were finishing the cleanup. Frank Wheeler was among the captured, wounded but alive. The sheriff surveyed the scene with grim satisfaction. Self-defense, clear as day, he pronounced. Frank, you and your boys are looking at a long stretch in territorial prison. As the law took charge, Clara found herself on her porch with Jake beside her. The other men who'd fought for her were being tended by Ben Davies, who'd returned with medical supplies. They'll think twice before coming at you again. Jake said, maybe. Clara was realistic. Or maybe they'll just come smarter next time. Then we'll be ready. She looked at him sideways. Are you planning on staying? If you'll have me. He turned to face her fully. Not asking for what we had, not asking for forgiveness or a second chance, just asking to be here, to help, to maybe earn a place in your life again. Clara considered him, scarred, steady. Nothing like the boy she'd loved, but maybe something better, something real, forged in fire and loss and survival. The old tack room in the barn could be fixed up, she said carefully. If someone was looking for a place to stay, just until things settle down. A ghost of his old smile touched his lips. That sounds fair. As the sun set over her defended land, Clara felt the walls she'd built beginning to crumble. Not falling all at once, she wasn't ready for that, but brick by brick, as trust was earned and proven in action rather than words. Jake stood to go prepare his new quarters, but paused. Clara, that man you shot behind me, I want you to know. You didn't have to. I would have handled it. I know, she said softly, but partners watch each other's backs. The word hung between them. Partners. Not lovers. Not yet, maybe not ever again. But partners was something. Partners was a beginning. As darkness fell over the ranch, Clara sat on her porch with her rifle, keeping watch. But for the first time in 5 years, she wasn't watching alone. And that, she admitted in the quiet of her heart, made all the difference. The smell of smoke woke Clara from restless sleep. For a moment, she thought she was dreaming, another nightmare about raiders and torches. Then, Jake's voice cut through the darkness, urgent and commanding. Clara, fire. She was out of bed in an instant, yanking on boots and grabbing her father's coat. Through the window, she could see orange flames licking at the eastern edge of her property, where the dry grass met the wheat field she'd planted last spring. By the time she reached the yard, Jake was already organizing the response. He'd roused the 2 ranch hands she'd recently hired, young men from town looking for honest work. Sam, get every bucket and barrel we have. Jake ordered, We'll start soaking the ground between the fire and the buildings. We need a fire break. The wheat, Clara said, her voice hollow. That field represented months of work, her hope for a profitable harvest. We'll save what we can, Jake said grimly. But the buildings come first. They worked through the night, a desperate battle against an enemy that couldn't be shot or reasoned with. Jake had them dig trenches, create controlled burns to rob the fire of fuel, organize bucket brigades from the well. His experience showed in every decision, every command. Clara found herself beside him, shoveling dirt until her hands bled, her lungs burning from smoke. Neither spoke of how the fire had started, but both knew this was no accident. Not with the wind blowing just right to carry flames toward her buildings. Not with Frank Wheeler's trial starting next week. Southwest corner's breaking through, Will shouted. Jake cursed, grabbing a wet blanket. Clara, keep the bucket line going. I'll try to beat it back. That's too dangerous. But he was already running toward the flames, using the blanket to smother spot fires that had jumped their fire break. Clara watched her heart in her throat as he disappeared into the smoke. The night became a blur of heat and smoke and desperate action. Tom Morrison arrived with more men from town, word having spread. Even some who'd been neutral before showed up to help. Fire threatened everyone in this dry country. As dawn broke, they finally gained the upper hand. The fire had consumed most of the wheat field and 2 storage sheds, but the main building stood safe. Clara stood swaying on her feet, surveying the damage. Black earth stretched where golden wheat should have been waving. Could have been worse, Jake said, appearing at her elbow. His face was black with soot, his shirt singed and torn. That wheat was going to pay the banknote, she said quietly. Without it, we'll figure something out. She turned on him, exhaustion making her sharp. There is no we, Jake. This is my problem, my land, my fight. Something flickered in his eyes. Hurt, maybe, quickly hidden. Right, of course. He walked away, and Clara immediately wanted to call him back. But pride and 5 years of habit kept her silent. The next days passed in a haze of cleanup and calculation. The damage was worse than she'd first thought. Not just the wheat, but fencing, equipment, feed stores for winter. The numbers didn't lie. Without that harvest, she couldn't make the bank payment. She was sitting at her kitchen table, staring at the ledgers. When Mary Patterson arrived with several other women from town, Clara tensed, expecting more false sympathy and prodding to sell. Instead, Mary set a basket on the table. "We've organized a collection," she said briskly. "Food, supplies, some cash. The church took up a special offering." Clara stared at her, speechless. "Don't look so surprised," Mary continued. "What you did, standing up to the Wheelers, it meant something. Showed us we don't have to let bullies run our town." She paused, seemingly uncomfortable with sentiment. "Besides, we need good ranchers like you, even if you do make questionable choices in men." After they left, Clara sat looking at the supplies, the small purse of money. It wouldn't save the ranch, but it might buy time, and the gesture itself. She found Jake in the barn, repairing tack by lantern light. He'd been distant since the fire, polite but careful, giving her the space her sharp words had demanded. "I'm sorry," she said without preamble. "What I said after the fire, it was wrong. You've been nothing but helpful, and I threw it in your face." He set down the leather he was working. "You were scared. I understand scared." "I'm still scared," she admitted, sinking onto a hay bale. "The banknote comes due in 3 weeks, without the wheat." "How much?" $200. Might as well be 2,000. Jake was quiet for a moment. Then he stood, walking to his saddlebags in the corner. He pulled out a leather pouch and set it on the workbench. "What's that?" "Open it." Inside were gold coins, more money than she'd seen in years. She looked up at him, uncomprehending. "My pay from Mexico," he explained. "Been saving it, living rough. It's enough to cover the note and then some." "I can't take your money." "It's not charity," he said firmly. "Consider it an investment, or a loan if that sits better. But you're not losing this ranch. Clara, not after everything you fought for." She stared at the gold, throat tight. "Why would you do this?" "You know why." The words hung between them, weighted with everything unsaid. Clara stood slowly, crossing to where he stood, in the lantern light. She could see new lines around his eyes, the scar more prominent in shadow. "I'm not the girl you left," she said softly. "I don't know if I can be her again." "I'm not asking you to be." His hand came up, hesitating just short of her cheek. "I'm asking to know who you are now." She leaned into his touch, just slightly, and felt 5 years of ice begin to crack. "I don't even know who that is anymore." "Then we'll figure it out together. If you'll let me." The barn was quiet except for the horses shifting in their stalls. Clara found herself studying his face, mapping the changes. This wasn't the impulsive boy who'd stolen kisses behind the church. This was a man who'd learned patience the hard way. "All right," she whispered. "All right. You can stay. Not just in the barn. There's a room in the house, off the kitchen. If you're going to be a partner in this ranch, you should live like one." His smile was like sunrise after a long night. Equal partners. "We'll see," she said, but she was fighting her own smile. "You still have a lot to prove." "Jake Thornton." "I know." He caught her hand, pressed it briefly to his lips. "But I've got time now. All the time you need." The next morning, they rode together to the bank. Mr. Daniels, the bank manager, could barely hide his disappointment when Clara placed the gold on his desk. "I had buyers interested," he said sourly. "Good offers for that land." "The land's not for sale," Clara said firmly. "Not now, not ever." Walking out of the bank, Clara felt lighter than she had in years. The ranch was safe. She wasn't alone. The future, which had looked so dark just days ago, suddenly held possibility again. "There'll be more trouble," Jake warned as they mounted their horses. "Wheeler has a lot of cousins, and wounded pride festers." "Then we'll face it," Clara said, "together." The word felt foreign on her tongue, but right somehow. As they rode back to the ranch, side by side, she thought about the fire that had nearly destroyed everything. But fire, she reflected, also cleared old growth, made room for new things to grow. That evening, as she helped Jake move his few possessions into the house, she found a worn journal among his things. He saw her looking and nodded permission. Inside were sketches, her ranch from different angles, the town, the mountains, and her, page after page of her face, drawn from memory over 5 long years. "You never forgot," she said softly. "Never could," he replied. "You were the North Star I steered by, even when I couldn't see you." Clara closed the journal carefully, handed it back. They had work tomorrow, fences to mend, fields to clear, a ranch to run. There would be challenges, setbacks, probably more attacks from those who resented their stand. But tonight, for the first time in 5 years, Clara Hayworth went to sleep knowing she wasn't facing tomorrow alone. And in the small room off the kitchen, Jake Thornton lay awake planning how to prove himself worthy of the trust she'd begun to place in him. The ranch house settled around them, no longer empty but full of possibility. Outside, the stars wheeled overhead, the same stars that had watched over 5 years of separation. Now they stood witness to something new, not a return to what was, but a careful building of what might be. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by a nervous young rider who wouldn't stay for coffee. Clara recognized the expensive paper, the formal seal. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened it at the kitchen table. Jake watching with concern from across the room. "It's from Theodore Morrison," she said, reading quickly. "The Territorial Bank in Denver. He's calling in all small ranch loans immediately. Says there's been irregularities in the local bank's practices." Jake's face darkened. "Morrison, Tom's cousin, isn't he the one who wanted to buy my land last year?" Clara set the letter down carefully, fighting to keep her voice steady. "He's giving me 2 weeks to pay the full balance, $800. "But you just made the payment." "Doesn't matter. He's found some legal mechanism to demand full repayment." She laughed bitterly. "Ed Wheeler's in jail, but his friends have deep pockets and long memories." Jake stood abruptly, pacing to the window. "There has to be something we can do. Legal recourse." With what lawyer, what money? Clara pressed her palms flat on the table. "Morrison owns half the territory's judges. This is perfectly legal robbery." "Then we'll find another way." Jake turned back to her, his scarred face set with determination. "I've still got contacts from Mexico, men who owe me favors. We could—" "No!" Clara's voice cut sharp. "Whatever you're thinking, no, I won't have you sliding back into that life. Not for me." "Clara, I mean it. Jake." She stood, meeting his eyes. "You came back to build something clean. I won't be the reason you throw that away." They stared at each other across the kitchen. 5 years of separation, nothing compared to this new distance. Finally. Jake nodded slowly. "Then we find another way. A clean way." Over the next days, they explored every option. The other ranchers were sympathetic but cash poor themselves. The church could offer prayers, but not $800. Even combining every asset they had, selling equipment and horses, they came up short. Clara found Jake one evening in the barn, cleaning his weapons with methodical precision. She recognized the signs, a man preparing for what he thought was inevitable violence. "There's another way," she said quietly. He looked up, hope flickering in his eyes. "I could marry Tom Morrison." The hope died, replaced by something darker. "What?" "He's proposed twice. His family has money. It would stop his cousin's legal games." She kept her voice practical, businesslike. "It's a solution." Jake set down the gun carefully, his movements too controlled. "Is that what you want?" "What I want hasn't mattered for a long time. It matters to me." He stood slowly, crossed to where she stood. Clara, we've come too far to give up now. Have we? She felt tears threatening, ruthlessly suppressed them. Maybe this is just the world telling us some things can't be fixed. Some chances, once lost, don't come back. I don't believe that. His hands framed her face gently. And neither do you. Or you wouldn't be out here telling me about it instead of already accepting Morrison's proposal. She closed her eyes, leaning into his touch despite herself. I can't lose this ranch. Jake, it's all I have left of my father, of who I was before, everything. You won't lose it, I swear to you. How can you promise that? He was quiet for a long moment. Then, there's something I haven't told you about Mexico, about why I stayed so long after Patterson died. Clara opened her eyes, saw him struggling with words. There was a job, one last job, a gold shipment that needed protecting, payment promise that would set me up for life. He laughed bitterly. Turned out to be a trap. Federales on one side, revolutionaries on the other, and me and 5 other fools in the middle. Jake. We got through, delivered the gold. But the man who hired us, he was grateful. Grateful enough to give me something beyond money. Jake moved to his saddlebags, pulled out an oilcloth package she'd never seen him touch. Inside was a document, official-looking with seals and stamps. What is this? A land grant, 20,000 acres in California, signed by the territorial governor, worth a fortune to the right buyer. He pressed it into her hands. I was saving it. Thought maybe someday, if you'd have me, we could start fresh somewhere new. Clara stared at the document, understanding its value. Jake, this is your future. You're my future. He said it simply, like stating the weather. Always have been. Take it. Sell it. Save your ranch. Our ranch, she corrected softly. Then louder, our ranch. If we do this, if I take this, then it's ours. Full partners. Legal papers drawn up proper. His smile was like dawn breaking. Partners. They rode to Denver 3 days later, the land grant hidden in Clara's saddlebags. The buyer Jake had contacted, a railroad man looking for California property, met them in a hotel that made Clara feel underdressed and rough. 20,000 acres, you say? The man, Pemberton, examined the documents carefully. Prime location for the rail expansion we're planning. Then you'll pay fair price, Jake said evenly. $15,000. Clara's breath caught. A fortune. More than enough to pay Morrison. Improve the ranch. Secure their future. 20. Jake countered. Cash, today. Pemberton studied them. Clara in her best dress that was still years out of fashion. Jake in his worn trail clothes. You're in no position to negotiate, Mr. Thornton. Maybe not, Jake agreed. But you want this land bad enough to meet us in Denver on 3 days' notice. 20,000, or we walk. An hour of negotiation later, they settled on 18,000. More money than Clara had ever imagined holding. As Pemberton's clerk counted out bills and gold certificates, she felt dizzy with the reality of it. Pleasure doing business, Pemberton said, shaking Jake's hand. Though I'm curious, why sell now land like this? A man could build an empire. Jake glanced at Clara. Already got everything I need. They left Denver with the money divided between them for safety, riding hard for home. Clara couldn't stop touching the bank drafts in her pocket, assuring herself they were real. You gave up California for a struggling ranch in Willow Creek, she said as they camped that night. I gave up land I'd never seen for the place that holds everything I care about, Jake corrected. Easy trade. The next morning, they rode into Willow Creek like conquering heroes. Word of their purpose had somehow spread. Perhaps Pemberton had connections, and Theodore Morrison was waiting at the bank, his face sour. Miss Hayworth, he said stiffly. I hear you've come into some money. Mrs. Hayworth Thornton, Clara corrected. showing him the marriage certificate they'd acquired in Denver from a judge Jake knew. "And yes, we're here to pay off the loan. In full, with interest." Morrison's face went through several interesting colors as she counted out the bills. Jake stood behind her, steady as a mountain, hand resting casual on his gun belt. "This doesn't change anything," Morrison said as he wrote the receipt. "There are other ways to pressure difficult ranchers." "Maybe," Jake agreed pleasantly. "But you might want to note that receipt is made out to both of us, and that we've got enough money left to hire very good lawyers, the kind that ask questions about irregular banking practices." Morrison's jaw tightened, but he said nothing more. Outside the bank, Clara stood holding the deed to her ranch, their ranch, free and clear. The sun was shining, the street busy with normal life, and for the first time in 5 years, she felt truly free. "So," Jake said, offering his arm, "what does Mrs. Hayworth Thornton want to do now?" She laughed, surprising herself with the sound. "First, we need to tell people that was just a business arrangement for the bank. I'm not ready. That is, we should take things slow." "Understood," Jake said, though his eyes danced. "Though you should know the judge was legitimate. The marriage is real if we want it to be." "Jake Thornton, are you trying to trick me into marriage?" "Never," he said solemnly. "I'm just saying, when you're ready, we won't need another ceremony, unless you want one." Clara tucked her hand into his arm, letting him escort her down Main Street like a proper couple. People stared, whispered, but she found she didn't care. Let them talk. She had her ranch, her partner, and the promise of a future that finally felt worth having. "When I'm ready," she said quietly, "I'll let you know." "I'll be waiting," Jake replied. "I'm good at waiting." They walked toward their ranch, their home, and Clara felt the last walls she'd built begin to crumble, not falling all at once, but brick by careful brick, making room for something new and strong to be built in their place. The document in her pocket wasn't just a deed to land. It was proof that second chances were possible, that trust could be rebuilt, that love, patient and kind and steadfast, could survive even 5 years of silence. And maybe, just maybe, that was worth more than all the gold in California. The storm came out of nowhere, the way winter storms did in the high country. One moment the sky was clear, the next, black clouds rolled over the mountains like an avalanche of darkness. Clara had seen plenty of storms in her years on the ranch, but something about this one set her nerves on edge. "We need to get the cattle to shelter," Jake said, already moving for his coat and gloves. The temperature was dropping fast, and the first fat snowflakes were beginning to fall. They'd been working as true partners for 3 months now since the bank incident. The ranch was thriving. New fences, repaired buildings, a small herd of quality breeding stock Jake had negotiated for. But all that could be lost in a single bad storm if they didn't move fast. "I'll take the north pasture," Clara said, pulling on her heavy coat. "You get the ones by the creek." "Clara, wait." Jake caught her arm. "This storm, it's going to be bad. Maybe you should stay here, keep the fires going." She gave him a look that could have melted steel. "Jake Thornton, we've been through this. Partners means partners. I'm not some delicate flower to be protected." "I know, but nothing. We've got maybe an hour before this turns into a full blizzard. We need every hand." They split up, riding into the growing storm. The wind hit Clara like a physical thing, trying to tear her from Buttercup's back. Snow came horizontal now, stinging exposed skin like needles. She could barely see 10 feet ahead, but she knew this land like her own heartbeat. The cattle were scattered, frightened by the storm. She worked with grim efficiency, using Buttercup to push small groups toward the sheltered valley where they'd have a chance. Her hands went numb inside her gloves. Her face burned with cold, but she kept working. An hour passed, maybe 2. The storm had become a monster, howling across the plains with fury that seemed personal. Clara had gotten most of the herd to safety, but a final group remained stubbornly on a rise, too panicked to move. As she urged Buttercup up the slope, the horse stumbled. They went down hard, Clara rolling clear just in time to avoid being crushed. She struggled to her feet, but Buttercup didn't rise. "No, no, no," Clara said, dropping beside the mare. Buttercup's eyes were wide with pain. Her left foreleg bent at an angle that made Clara's stomach turn. The cattle had scattered again, but Clara didn't care. She pulled off her coat, draping it over Buttercup's neck, trying to shield her from the worst of the storm. The mare had been Jake's gift, her companion through 5 lonely years. She couldn't lose her like this. "Clara," Jake's voice, barely audible over the wind. He appeared like a ghost from the white, sliding from his horse before it had fully stopped. What happened? "Her leg," Clara said through chattering teeth. "It's broken. She can't." Jake's face was grim as he examined the injury. They both knew what a broken leg meant for a horse, especially in conditions like these. He pulled his pistol, checked the load. "No," Clara said. "Please." "Clara, she's suffering." His voice was gentle but firm. "It's the kind thing." "I know." The tears froze on her cheeks. "I know, but she was all I had of you. All those years." Jake holstered the gun, pulled Clara against him. "Then we stay with her, both of us, until—" They huddled there in the storm, shielding Buttercup as best they could. The mare's breathing was labored, pained. Clara stroked her neck, whispering memories. The day Jake had brought her home, their rides across summer meadows, the nights Buttercup had been her only friend. "Thank you," Clara whispered to the horse, "for everything." Jake's hand covered hers on Buttercup's neck. Together they stayed until the mare's breathing slowed, stopped. Only then did Jake draw his gun, did what needed doing. The shot was swallowed by the storm. "We need to go," Jake said urgently. "This storm's getting worse." Clara couldn't feel her feet anymore. When she tried to stand, her legs buckled. Jake caught her, his face tight with concern. "When did you take off your coat?" Buttercup was cold. He cursed, shrugging out of his own coat and wrapping it around her. "Can you ride?" "I think so." But when he lifted her onto his horse, she swayed dangerously. Jake swung up behind her, arms around her to hold the reins, his body blocking the worst of the wind. "Stay awake," he commanded. "Talk to me." "About what?" Her voice sounded strange, distant. "Anything. The future, what we'll do come spring." Spring. The word felt foreign. Will we plant wheat again?" "If you want, or maybe something else. Heard there's good money in alfalfa." They rode through the white nightmare, Jake navigating by instinct and prayer. Clara drifted in and out, aware of his arms around her, his voice constant in her ear, pulling her back each time she started to fade. "Remember that first dance," he was saying. "At the church social, you wore that blue dress with the little flowers." "You stepped on my feet," Clara murmured. "You stepped on mine first." "Did not." "Did too, then blamed it on me to your father." She tried to laugh, but it came out as a cough. The cold was inside her now, settling into her bones like it meant to stay. "Almost there," Jake said. "I can see the house." The last thing Clara remembered was being lifted down, carried through driving snow, then warmth, blessed warmth, and Jake's voice sharp with fear. "Don't you dare leave me now, not after everything. Clara, open your eyes. Clara." She woke to sunlight and the crackle of fire. Every part of her ached, but she was alive, warm, in her own bed. Jake sat beside her, haggard and unshaven, holding her hand like he was afraid she'd disappear if he let go. "Hey," she whispered. His eyes snapped open, relief flooding his face. "Hey yourself, you gave me a scare." "The cattle. Safe, most of them. Lost a few, but not many." He squeezed her hand. Thought I lost you. Takes more than a storm to kill a Hayworth. Thornton, he corrected softly. Remember legal and everything. Clara studied his face. The worry lines, the exhaustion, the love he wasn't trying to hide anymore. Jake. Yeah. I'm ready. He blinked. Ready for what? To be your wife, real and proper. Not just for the bank or the ranch, for us. His smile started slow and spread like sunrise. You sure you're not just saying that because I saved your life? You've saved my life a dozen times over, and I've saved yours. She struggled to sit up, ignoring his protests. But that's what partners do. What married folks do. They save each other, over and over, through storms and fires and all the hard things life throws at them. Clara Hayworth Thornton, he said, testing the name. Has a nice sound. It does. She touched his face, traced the scar that no longer seemed like a mark of separation but a map of survival. Though I was thinking, maybe it's time to stop surviving and start living. What does that mean? It means yes to alfalfa in the spring. Yes to maybe hiring more hands so we don't have to do everything ourselves. Yes to going to church socials and not caring what people whisper. She took a breath. Yes to building a life instead of just defending one. Jake kissed her then, careful of her chapped lips. Gentle but sure. It wasn't their first kiss, but it felt like a beginning anyway. Outside, the storm had passed, leaving the world clean and white and new. From the window, Clara could see the mountains standing guard over their valley, their ranch, their future. She thought of Buttercup, faithful to the end, and felt grief mixed with gratitude. She brought you back to me, Clara said softly. Even in dying, she brought you back. Jake understood, holding her close. We'll name the first foal after her. The first? Well, we'll need horses. Can't run a proper ranch with just one mount between us. Our ranch, Clara said, liking the sound. Our horses, our future. Our life, Jake agreed. They sat together watching the sun turn the snow to diamonds. Two people who'd traveled long roads to find their way back to each other. The storms would come again. They always did in this hard country. But they'd weather them together. Partners in truth, in trust, in love that had proved itself stronger than time or distance or all the wounds the world could inflict. In the distance, a hawk circled over the white valley, riding the wind with fierce grace. Clara watched it and thought about freedom, not the bitter freedom of isolation she'd known for 5 years, but the sweet freedom of choosing to bind her life to another's, of building something larger than either could create alone. Welcome home, she whispered, not sure if she meant it for Jake or herself. Home, he agreed, and in that word was everything. Forgiveness and promise, ending and beginning. Two hearts that had found their way through storm and separation to this moment of perfect, imperfect peace. The ranch stood strong around them, no longer a monument to abandonment, but a foundation for everything that came next, and in the weeks that followed, as winter gave way to spring and the earth came alive again. So too did the life they built together, careful and strong and made to last, like love itself. Thank you for listening to this story. Where are you enjoying these tales from? Drop a comment below. I'd love to know if you're listening during your commute, relaxing at home, or somewhere unexpected. Don't forget to subscribe to From Wild West channel and share your thoughts. Your comments help create our community of Western story lovers.